The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark, I cannot see.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker at Elkins Consulting. Today, listeners, you might be surprised. I know you'll be inspired. And I also know that you will be touched by today's episode. My guest is Maya Williams, and I met her when I was hosting the storytelling and spirituality workshop at St. Joseph's College of Maine outside of Portland, Maine in Standish. And we spent the day together talking about our definitions of spirituality and which stories could demonstrate those definitions so that we wouldn't have to tell people we were spiritual beings. And so that we could more clearly understand our definition, our personal experience with spirituality, so that we wouldn't is a strong word, so that we would be less likely to project that version of spirituality onto others. And at the end of the day, Maya gave me a hug that I felt down to my toes. It was one of those hugs that you just know the person's heart, even if you have no other context for their lived experience. And we got in touch following the workshop. I had looked up her book that she told me she had published and bought it. And then found out when I bought the book that she was the poet laureate of Portland, Maine. And I suddenly had this imposter syndrome moment of, oh my gosh, I had no idea this person was in my workshop. Now I'm wondering, oh my gosh, what am I going to teach her? So it was one of those moments that I was so grateful that I am a learner and that I was presenting this workshop in the context of what will I take from it as well, and not what can I exclusively give, but what will I receive in this workshop as well. I've never been more grateful for that part of my learning capacity. So listeners, let's just jump right in. Maya, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Your workshop was incredible, and I really appreciate your kind words about you learning from me as much as, and also like it's because I'm learning a lot from you, and I have learned a lot from you from that workshop. So I just really appreciate your time.
Well, let's get started. You know from other episodes that I love to ask my guests to share something about themselves that most people don't know. And it's so funny because a lot of people say, well, I'm kind of an open book. And then they say something that is not open book-ish. So I have zero doubts that you would say, I'm an open book.
I guess like, and I tried to think about this before we met up today too. But I think the first, like, what most people would not know about me is that I learned how to create this sound from my throat when I was like 10 or 11 years old. That's commonplace for a lot of folks, but at the time I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And it sounds like and it turns out that's not that original. But within the context of this conversation, like it's fun that now people will be like, oh, Maya can do that.
That is so funny. I love it. And what was I mean, was it something you heard somebody else do and that made you even try it?
Yeah. A childhood friend was showing me and my sisters how to do it, and then as soon as we learned how to do it, we just kept doing it around the house, where my mom and like my grandma and our aunts had to be like, y'all stop, please, this is a lot.
That is so funny. Yes, that is unexpected. That reminds me of when I was a kid, and our families would always do weird shapes with our tongues. And apparently it's a genetic thing, whether you can curl up your tongue,
Oh
make it a
yeah.
circle, or we try to turn it completely upside down, see how far upside down we could get it. And everyone in our family would be like, can you do that? And it's so weird. Why do we do those things?
Because they were fun at the time.
I know. Can you curl your tongue? Does it matter? And now it's like lifting of the eyebrows is always a thing because I can lift one eyebrow pretty significantly. And sometimes I can do the other one. But I
Oh,
remember
that's
when
cool.
that's the thing my sister says, oh, Sydney can lift both eyebrows. That's her daughter. Like, well, and we all make jokes about it and we try it. And it's so funny the way we do these weird things with our faces. But I wonder how that connects us. Like, why is that a thing? Is that kind of weird? I mean, isn't it weird?
Yeah. Like I find it so fascinating because of how it's a moment of play, right? And like and yeah, again, these acts are not original, but we're still fascinated by it. We're still going like, oh, that's cool. And it's one of those few moments of play and going like, oh, me too, me too. Especially like before we lose that sense of play as we get older. Like so,
I hadn't thought about it like that. And maybe it's part of what keeps us curious
mm,
about what we can do, what we can't do. I wonder if that's part of it. Huh.
maybe.
Wow, that's something to consider. I don't know why. I guess because we always wonder where we've lost our sense of play and curiosity, and maybe that's something that can bring it back in our families when we ask those questions. Can you curl your tongue? It's a genetic thing of whether you can do that. And can you make that weird sound that comes out of the back of your throat? I thought for sure you were going to say, like, you learned that you could harmonize with yourself like the Tuvan throat singers. When you said the sound from the, I'm like, no way you can. Or the didgeridoo players that can do the cyclical breathing where it comes in the nose and out the mouth. I was going to be really, really impressed, Maya.
Oh, darn.
I know. Well, that's so interesting. And especially because now that you're saying this, you and your sisters, how many siblings do you have?
I have two sisters and a brother, and I am the oldest. I'm the oldest sibling.
Oh, wow. So four of you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that plays a role in your sense of responsibility and
Oh, 100%.
are you the responsible one?
100%. What was that?
Are you the responsible one of your siblings?
Yes.
Huh, that's funny. And how old is your youngest sibling now?
Oh, goodness. He just turned 24 a few days ago.
Oh, so he's just finally getting his brain back. Isn't that great when they finally get their brain back?
It's brilliant.
I have to tell you, like my younger son is 22 and he got his brain back much earlier than my older son.
Mm.
But I remember when they were, I think they were 12 and 14. And this is right before everything came out about Bill Cosby. But there was that bit that he did on teenagers that they're brain damaged. You
Oh,
must be
wow.
brain damaged, right? And he makes this whole bit about how uh, he says to his kid, "What were you thinking?" And there's the answer, "I don't know." It's a really funny bit, and we showed both of our boys that Bill Cosby bit, and it wasn't until a little while longer that I stopped watching any of those YouTube videos, unfortunately. But I remember then reading an article about how our brains actually slough off brain cells in the frontal cortex at about 12 or 13, and that continues until about 24.
Mm.
And so technically, if you're looking at somebody's brain in those age ranges, they are actually brain damaged because
Mm.
they've sloughed off these brain cells from the frontal cortex, which is the part that's responsible for our understanding of consequences
Hmm.
This is why it's great to get these 18-year-olds into the military,
Huh.
because they'll do things without understanding the consequences.
Oh, that's hard.
So they're at the perfect age for doing that, and at the worst possible age for doing that, right?
Yeah.
So, but we read
Heartbreaking.
this when, yeah, so we read this when the boys were little, with preteen and teenager. My husband sent the article to all four of us to read. And I remember sitting at the dining room table and saying, okay, you guys, this isn't an excuse, but it is something to know.
Yeah.
So that when you're thinking about doing something, maybe you ask, what are the consequences? What are the risks? When you think about something, if you're looking around to see if an adult is around, that means you know somewhere in your conscious being that it's probably not a good idea. If you're trying to figure out whether somebody's going to see you doing it. Oh, that should be your clue.
Hmm.
It's fascinating. So that's why I said that about your brother. Like, oh, okay, 24, 25 is when they start to rebuild those neural pathways.
Hmm.
I don't know. Who knew, right? I still wonder about my own brain sometimes. So I'm way past that age. So tell me, let's bring this around to the spirituality workshop that we did together, because when I asked you to be on my podcast, you said that that's something you would really like to talk about on it. So
Yeah.
for our listeners, Maya has 2 books out, and there will be links to purchase those books in the blog post associated with the podcast at elkinsconsulting.com. But the books are called Judas and Suicide. And the second one that's just out is Refused a Second Date, which has a bit more humor than the first one.
Yes.
They're both just full of inspiring and sometimes very dark and sad and hard things to read, the kind of hard that everyone needs to be exposed to.
Thank you.
But yes, thank you. So what were you thinking about when you said that that's something you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about it because it's such an integral part of my life. It's not something that I can separate from my creative life or separate from any parts of entities of my identity. And so it's a topic that I tend to get the most excited about. It's a topic that's in both of my books. It tends to be more so in Judas and Suicide than Refused a Second Date, but it is a little bit in Refuse a Second Date. So I still wanted to talk about it.
Oh, that makes sense. And when you think about your current spirituality or your current spiritual practices, what do you think happened that enlightened you to where you are now? So the reason I ask that pivotal moment or a pivotal experience that kind of shifted you into where you are spiritually now, I think about how I was spiritual at home, raised in a very Jewish household, and that religious spirituality, even though I never really felt spiritual at the synagogue, and then how I brought it back after having kids, to a much more spiritual practice of those rituals without a synagogue at all. And I think about sitting in my car driving to work and having this moment, having this, when I was pregnant with Jacob and he was moving around a lot, and he'd get hiccups every morning and wake me up in utero. And I remember suddenly having that sense of greater being, right? That I couldn't imagine growing this living, breathing being without there being something greater than me out there. It's definitely very spiritual connection. So that was, I would say that moment sitting in the car, like I remember it, having that sense of, wow, there's a living being in here, that I'm growing, and being so puzzled and overwhelmed and connected. And then I remember some other moments that we can talk about later that made me feel so spiritual. So can you share a couple of those that kind of brought you to where you are now?
So I consider myself both spiritual and religious. I define my spirituality as my connection to God, and I define religion as like my list of guidelines when it comes to when it comes to God. But as far as a pivotal moment, as far as what made me come to where I am now in my spirituality. And also it's like I feel like it's so non-linear. It's always gonna
Right.
go up and down and sideways. I feel like if you haven't gone through any forms of crisis of faith, it's like, huh? Tell me what that's like. But uh my friend who I refer to in Refuse a Second Date, who was my first kiss in the sixth grade. And he and I were friends for a very long time and try to maintain touch throughout the years. He had died by suicide during my sophomore year in college, and what awakened for me spiritually during that time was like this idea around what is the point of grieving alone when God created so many people around you for a reason? What is the point of you literally isolating yourself in the same way your friend did when you have so many resources out there for you, when you have so many ways to be able to sit with joy in a natural way that doesn't have to feel forced because of people around you. And granted, like there's a lot to critique about religious upbringing where they're like, oh, well, talk to God so you don't have to talk to me. But when we talk more about spiritual guidance, it's like we're not supposed to be going through any of this alone. God did not intend for us to be alone. And that being an awakening. And I don't want to frame it in a way where it's like, oh, trauma is the reason why my spirituality is like this, because that's not the narrative I want to perpetuate, especially because there have been a lot of people who have used that as a way to just extend more harm. But this is to say it was pivotal for me to continue to expand what my support system looks like, and recognize that there are things far beyond my control and things far beyond me and the entity of my body and my soul. And it's just like, this, I keep doing a hand gesture that's like throwing something because it's like it's just outside of my being. Like, oh, you take care of this. I'm not holding that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. When you think about, oh my gosh, you said so much in there that I would like to kind of understand more.
Yeah.
The first thing that popped into my head was when you said, I wasn't meant to isolate, and that was part of knowing that was part of what your friend did was isolate rather than share and be in community. When you realized that, who was your community? What did you do to reduce that potential? Because I know once we feel that isolation, it's harder and harder to reach out after we've gone into that curled up ball.
Yeah.
In cocoon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The community that I was able to reach out to at the time was for one thing finally returning to therapy after like such a long hiatus since middle school, and just finally coming back to it, and being able to engage with people in community or organizing circles that I was involved in college, and being involved in campus ministry in college, and as an adult I look back on certain aspects of my time in campus ministry that I still very much critique, especially when it comes to their policy around queer and trans people and leadership, and that playing a role into why I was not out at the time. And at the same time, like that was the first community to tell me that I didn't have to grieve by myself. So
that's powerful, right? Like I think that's why a lot of people end up in communities that don't necessarily fit them.
Mm-hmm.
If they're feeling like at least there's this, right? Instead of continuing to look for a community that will fit you.
Mm-hmm.
you stop and you stay in that, I'm going to put air quotes up, safe place, because they're welcoming you into a community. Any community at that point is going to serve some purpose, right?
Yeah. And also like that ended up pushing me to find more communities that to use your word fit. And like being and also being able to engage in spaces where I'm able to remind myself like, oh, I don't have to attend a house of worship that does not love me.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you feel so strongly about God being a loving being. Oh my gosh. So when you think about that experience of being welcomed in a community, the community you needed at that time, clearly this was something that was a healing part of your journey, even if it wasn't it wasn't a complete healing, but it was the beginning of it. What's the image that pops into your head? Are you at a church or are you at a campus event? What's the image when you think of community in that time in your life?
Yeah, I think about a campus event. Thinking about times in my dorm with people that I know. Think about things like that. I think about the partner that I had at the time who, again, as an adult, it's like he and I caused each other so much harm. And at the same time, I can look back on that and be grateful for the times where he was like, "Hey, I'm here if you need anything. You're in so much pain. I love you. Go to therapy."
Yeah. So you mentioned being in the dorms and having that community. Is there a specific time that pops into your head, like a conversation you had? And I'm digging here because what I love to do is find a particular moment in time that can represent that era in your life, so that you don't have to tell the full, I started school there and this is what I was doing. These were my friends, and going through that linear description, but being able to kind of pick out a time and our memories are fallible. Our memories are not accurate. And yet sometimes when we tell a story like that, it ends up being kind of a conglomeration of different moments in time, but our brain just puts it together into one story. Do you have one like that is popping into your head?
Yeah, I think of this time where like I was just crying around people in a small group related to my campus ministry, and I was saying the phrase, and I know God doesn't give you any more than you can handle, and then someone's hugging me, and she says the phrase, "That is bullshit."
It was like in that moment you woke up, right?
Yeah.
I can see it in your face. I wish our listeners could see that expression on your face.
Like,
whoa. I'm imagining you saying in your head, whoa, thank you.
Yeah.
You're right. It's bullshit. Why do people say that? Wow. Yeah, that's a powerful moment. Does any other thing from that era of your life pop into your head? Like maybe the time when you realized maybe this isn't for me?
Like, because I know I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I'm gonna say it again anyway. Just talking to my therapist when I first moved to Maine, and I was still trying to navigate like what did it mean for me be to be in Christian community in a predominantly not non-religious area, and like um and I remember telling my therapist like, oh well, I know that not every space is perfect, right? So I just need to find the first thing that's available to me, and that and then my therapist tells me like, you do not have to go to a house of worship that does not love you.
That was your therapist that said that.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So basically the therapist is giving you permission to keep looking.
Yeah.
And not just giving you permission, but encouraging you Part of what I love about that is that so many times I have talked to people who needed therapy, went to one or two counselors, didn't get anything out of it, and then just stopped rather than continuing to look for one that would work for them.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, well, I went to this doctor that couldn't help me for my headache, so I just stopped looking for a doctor. Right? Like, no, that's not what would happen.
Yeah.
You don't just stop trying to find out what's causing these headaches just because one doctor couldn't find the answer for you.
Yeah. It especially makes me feel upset when someone says something like, "Oh, I tried going to a therapist, but I felt worse afterwards, so I stopped going." And it's like, but that's part of the work. That's part of the work. I can understand like not wanting to continue with the therapist for like if they said something bigoted or they weren't doing their jobs, right? But they're doing their job and you feel worse afterwards. It's like you need to give it more time. Like
oh my gosh. Yeah. I had a client like that. Coaching is the same way. You don't just stop going to coaching because somebody made you feel bad about yourself. Like, and it's not the person who's making you feel bad. It's you who feels bad because you realize that you might have done something that hurt somebody else or that you're hurting yourself. And I remember having a coaching client that he said, "Well, you just tell it like it is, don't you?" And I said, "Well, if you want somebody who's going to, just tell you you're right all the time, then you need to work with a different coach.
Right.
You were wrong. This wasn't okay."
Right.
That just brought up so much in my head. You could tell now my brain is throwing something into the distance. Like, well, that's so much bigger than me right now. But I also understand that the desire to stop when something is painful. So I had a conversation with a woman that I was kind of mentoring informally. And I remember this moment where she told me that our last conversation really was not good for her and that I had hurt her by being contradictory. It felt like I was just contradicting everything she said and felt like to her that I was kind of throwing in her face the beautiful life I lead. And she was alone. And here I was talking about my husband and she was sad. And I was talking about how happy I was. And it was a pretty intense email. And of course, my first reaction was to be defensive. Like in my brain, the first thing I thought was, well, I was just trying to help and you just didn't get it. And this is about you. It's not about me. And all the stuff that is totally natural to come into a person's head when they're faced with a mirror. And that's what she was doing. She was putting up a mirror. And in some ways, there's some things that I could say, okay, that really wasn't about me. But the other side of that was my goal wasn't to hurt her. And whatever my intention was, doesn't matter if that was her perception. And I remember after the initial response of feeling defensive, of going back into myself and thinking, okay, I'm defensive because there's some aspect of that is real and that I need to face. And I ended up calling her. And I don't remember if she answered, but I remember saying, thank you. And I'm sorry. Thank you for sharing this with me, because I realized that many times when I've spent time with my mother, I know we all do this, but I regress. Yeah, I spend more than a few days with my mother and suddenly I get very contradictory. My mom would say the sky is blue, I'll say it's green, right? It's just like that weird relationship I have with her. And after I've spent time with her, I do that to other people. And this woman that I was informally mentoring called me on it. And it changed everything in how I interact with people, how I coach. I'm so much more conscious of that now. So I get it. It's hard when somebody gets that mirror put up in front of them, and it's much easier to just say, wow, that hurts, I'm going away. Let's turn this back.
Yeah, deep breath. Deep breaths.
Let's turn this back. So when you, let's go back into this whole, I'm really loving this story of your spiritual journeys. And I'm calling them journeys because, as you said, that it's not a linear thing. And sometimes it tanks and then something happens and brings us back, right? Do you have a story example of a time when it kind of tanked and came back to you?
When it tanked and came back to me.
Yeah. Maybe
Ooh.
in a different form.
I was dating someone at the time, and then it had stopped abruptly. Um, and I was calling a friend about it who had lived states away. Um, and then at one point I said something like, and I know that he has a different set of spiritual values, and then my friend interjects and goes like, then why do you want that? Why would you want a person like that in your life then? If like
If you know that, right?
like it so shout out to my friend who wasn't all like, oh yeah, no, I understand. He was just like, why would you want that?
I love that. Abrupt, straight to the point. And that was another, whoa, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
What was I thinking?
Apparently the most impactful friends of my life have been the friends who tell me like it is, because that's how I get it.
Well, I get that because subtlety is totally lost on me. It goes right over my head. I need that. So you must need that too. I think we attract those people into our lives when we need them.
Yeah, absolutely. Like and I now have follow-up questions in my mind too about like how much of this has to do with neurodivergence, as far as like you can't talk around things with me so much. It's like you need to bring it to here. Like
It could be neurodivergence. I've seen that for sure. I've experienced a lot of that in the people in my life. And I think most of us, when we are in that place, need a more direct person
yeah.
that we trust. I mean, it can't just be somebody coming out of, well, although sometimes it is a stranger, total stranger that wakes us up with a virtual slap, right? Like a brick to the head. But I think most of the time when we are in there, we need somebody to be direct like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, I think about when we're in a relationship that is really not good for us, we're not going to see it. And nobody close to us can say, oh, he's no good for you, right? We're going to dig in our heels even more, especially me. Like I'm pretty, yeah, I can be like that. I'm an Aries. Like I know I'm doing me. You can't get in my way. But then sometimes it's the stranger that can be the one, right? When was when have you been that person? I know you have. I have no doubt that you have been that person to somebody, either a stranger or to somebody you love. Like, you're wrong. Don't do that. What are you thinking?
I I have been like this. I just need to think of a moment when. Oh
I
my
love your laugh.
goodness. Oh, thank you.
You're making me smile.
Oh,
I
thank
always
you.
have these moments in time in my head that just pop. It was, and I have this analogy or metaphor, I guess. When I was in college in Australia, I took a class called Native Fictions. It was the Australian literature course I took. And there was a book that there's a woman that describes her memories as it's like a ball in her head that spins and a spotlight. And when something triggers a memory, it stops the ball still.
Mm.
The spotlight hits the spot on the ball. And that's like, oh, and then she has this vision of whatever the memory was. And I think about that And that was, gosh, this was 1989.
Oh, wow.
So clearly that book had an impact. But anyway, what is your spotlight looking at right now?
I have a memory. I was working with a student on on a there's an organization called the Telling Room. They work with young people to write pieces for published anthologies or even for their own published books. And I'm working with the student on their poetry book, and they say, I don't like this poem that I'm working on. It doesn't make me feel good. And then I said, well, of course it doesn't make you feel good. You're not in it. Like, if you write about yourself, you'd like it more. And then one of the instructors had overheard me as they were walking by, and they say out loud, "Ah!" And, and the student and I look at them, and they were like, I didn't need to hear that about my own writing, Maya. How dare you? And
Truth. They were both shocked by your truth.
in the acknowledgments of because they do have their book out now. The student put in their acknowledgments, like, thank you for working with me even when I was stubborn. Thank you. And I'm just like, yay.
Oh, what a beautiful acknowledgement. Well, when you think about it, so many people just give up when they're faced with somebody who's stubborn or who is too needy, or, they have all that baggage. And a lot of people give up with people like that. They just don't, they decide it's not worth whatever energy they're putting in or whatever. And you didn't. You're like, I know there's more in here, and I'm not giving up. And that student saw that, experienced that in you. To me, what that says is that student will forever be more self-reflective because they know that when somebody gives them that kind of guidance, it's because they care. Mm. And when you know it's coming from a place of care, it makes you take the guidance differently. I think about that woman that I talked about, the informal mentoring. I knew she told me that because A, I hurt her in some way, and B, she cared enough about me to tell me that. She could have just ghosted me and we'd never see each other, hear from each other again. But she didn't. Mm-hmm. She felt like I needed to hear that. And she was right. As painful as it was. Mm-hmm. Man, that was painful.
What a gift. What a gift.
Exactly. Those painful moments, even when they're coming from somebody who doesn't love you, can be such a gift, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think a lot about spite as a motivator. I really do. Okay, so when you think of spite as a motivator, what's the story that pops into your head?
I'm a believer in righteous spite. I am a huge believer in that. And I know that in college, I spoke to a hotline after experiencing harm from the same person I mentioned earlier, who I was dating at the time. And the hotline worker at one point says, well, maybe you two shouldn't have been in the same bed. And I'm like, oh, okay. Huh? And then years later, I applied to a job at the main transgender network to be their sexual assault and domestic violence program coordinator. And I had mentioned, like, I'm just letting you know that I'm in this job out of spite.
Yeah, exactly. And I would never do that to anybody, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Exactly. Yeah, that's a good one. Well, that's a good one. There are so many times that I did stuff. I was successful because I was spiting somebody. Like in high school, when one of my teachers told me that I wouldn't pass the English comp AP test, he was like, you're not gonna. And I was like, oh yeah, you watch me. Mm-hmm. And of course I did. Barely.
Exactly.
Barely.
No, but
Wow.
you got to have that spite. You got to
Yeah,
express it.
it works. Yeah, my friend Valerie Gordon wrote a book, Fire Your Narrator, and it's all
Nice.
about that inner dialogue. And there's at one point, I don't think it's in that book, but she wrote about the unlikelies, and these are the things that you wouldn't think would motivate you, but do. And that's one of them. Spite. And I think,
Nice.
as long as you're using it to your advantage and it's
Yeah.
positive, there's nothing wrong with righteous spite. That's what you called it.
Yeah, that's what I call it. Yeah.
Do you have more? Like, are there any teachers in your past? Because I know when I was friends with these teenagers, I was a mom of young boys, and these teenagers would come to my house all the time. And these three girls, and one of them, Britt, she said, yeah, my teacher said I would never graduate, that I'd be pregnant at 17 or whatever. And I said, so you're going to let him win? You're going to let him be right? Are you kidding me? And I was like pushing her to be spiteful, to graduate from high school without getting pregnant, graduate from high school, maybe even think about what's going to happen next. I said, I don't know if you want college or what, but you got to show him that he's wrong. You spite the heck out of that guy. And then you go back to the high school and show him your diploma, right? You go back to that teacher and go, see, flip him off, whatever you need to do. But
because I like to use the phrase righteous spite to describe that. And usually that's just to just so that folks are not thinking of like oh you just being spiteful just because you can, or like, oh, is this spite coming from an unnecessary place? And it's like, no, it's coming from a very necessary place. And like another phrase that I tend to say a lot and I've written a lot about has been like it makes, in a world where people want me dead and want a lot of loved ones of mine dead, it's like, what a nice middle finger, what a nice day to make them so mad to still be alive anyway. It's like I've heard friends of mine say things like, I'm just alive out of spite.
Whatever it takes, honey, whatever it takes to keep you on this planet with me in good company. Oh, I love that. That's such a common Jewish practice too.
I love it.
Yeah, they tried to kill us all. They failed. Let's eat. That's what they say most of the Jewish holidays are about. Yeah, and this year Hanukkah will definitely be especially meaningful to all Jews. That's for sure. Oh my gosh, I love that. Okay, so I want to make sure that we hear the stories that you feel compelled to share about your spirituality. So when you thought about being on the show, wanting to share some aspect of your spirituality as a gift to listeners, and also to express it yourself for your own internal messages, tell me what you're thinking about.
I'm thinking a lot about how poetry has been surrounding my life for a very long time, and how it's been a spiritual pulse in my life for a very long time. And yeah, I can't separate my spirituality from poetry, or poetry from spirituality. They've become so intertwined. That just is what it is. And like, and it reminds me of how there is so much pain, and there's going to continue to be pain, because being alive means having to live with pain. And my journey with my mental health is going to continue to be this wishy-washy relationship with pain, especially as it integrates with my physical health too. I was diagnosed with endometriosis a couple of months ago, and like, so witnessing how that's been combined with my mental health has been a lot. And at the same time, it just feels really good to know that things beyond me are the reasons why there's this joy in in poetry, and how like there's the more nuanced joy, and the joy that reminds us of like how we got to that joy is very important to me, and very relevant when it comes to the honesty that poetry can provide, and the honesty that the spiritual connection can provide, regardless of spiritual, irreligious, religious, not religious worldview, and how much love comes from that, and my love for people comes from that, and wanting to like, because I don't want this to become a thing where it's like, oh, God's using your trauma for good, and I'm like, no, God did not want me to suffer. So no, we're not saying that. But I do want my work to be of service to others, because it's certainly of service to myself. And wanting to provide that connection, and wanting folks to feel that love and feel held, and reminisce on their own love stories, and reminisce on their own healing journeys that are all zigzaggy. And if you have follow-up questions about that, I'm more than happy to hear them if there's anything I need to expand on with that, because I know that I'm just talking, but it feels good to just be talking.
It sounds good to just hear you talking. I'm curious about your exposure to poetry. Is this something that came from your parents or a teacher? Did you find it on your own?
This came from just writing a lot as a kid, like writing stories, and like having a bunch of crayons, and then like stapling computer paper together for like these, like, look, I made a book. And it wasn't until the age of 8 where I started writing poems. And I typically tell people that like I started performing spoken word between late high school, early college, and was competing a lot in collegiate slams throughout all 4 years of college, and competed a little bit after moving to the New England area, and then I stopped in like 2018. But I started publishing more poems since 2018.
I was into poetry as a kid, and then in AP English, we had to create a poetry notebook and have the poem, and then have our description underneath it. What was it about the poem? And we had different kinds of poems that we had to include, different structures of poems. And I just found that notebook in a closet a little while ago.
What stood out?
Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy stood out, and a couple of Shakespeare, a sonnet, and then a piece from one of his tragedies. And I guess what stood out to me was that the poems continue to resonate. And some of them were like, wow, I wonder what I saw in that. Because I'm looking at it going, that doesn't, I don't understand that at all. Why did that resonate? Was I just grabbing something because I was running late? Like, what was that about? So I'm curious about any particular poets that captured your attention younger, maybe some that are continuing to capture your attention now.
When I was younger, Maya Angelou was a great influence. Very, very, very honored to share her name. As I get older, a lot of the poets that tend to resonate with me are Anis Mojgani. He's currently the statewide poet laureate of Oregon. Kaveh Akbar. He's so brilliant, and so smart, with his poetry, and how he writes about spirituality and recovery, as someone who was brought up as Muslim. Really love Wanda Coleman's work. Zandria Phillips is an incredible poet and visual artist. Also, I love a lot of my friends' work. I love my best friend Mia Stewart Willis's poetry. They write a lot about Blackness, transness, and language and archaeology in a way that I find really fascinating.
Mm. Wow. For our listeners, we will have these names in a list on that blog post associated with the podcast. Again, elkinsconsulting.com. So keep an eye out for that so that you can click and look into these artists, these poets. I'm eager to dive in myself. And one last follow-up, if that's okay.
Please, yeah.
When you think about your future as a poet, you've already said to some extent that you want to be in service of other people's healing, of other people's expression. What do you get most joy out of when you think about your future as a poet?
Get the most joy out of like having more opportunities to hear other people's poetry and work. I really love facilitating workshops where it's like, okay, first I'm sharing my poems, I'll answer a bunch of questions you have about the book, publishing, whatever. But then the entire rest of the time is just hearing from other people and hearing what's resonated with them from the beginning and what's inspiring them and what's surprising them, and just having more opportunities to hear more people share and hearing how they implement their poems in different ways. Because like because there's a lot of discourse around like oh, poetry is not activism, and it's like you know what, I agree with that. Poetry is not legislative writing. Poetry is not organizing per se, and at the same time poetry is a pulse in activism. Poetry is the pulse that is able to like inspire so many people to do the work that you want us to do. And like poetry is one of the most requested art forms, and yet we're paid the least. So this idea around poetry has nothing to do with activism is a lie. Especially when there are poets who are activists and are doing quote the work end quote, and I'm just looking forward to seeing more ways of how people around me are doing their own work, whether that's activism work or whether it's their own healing work or whether it's another creative work that's creating a whole other pulse of things.
I did not expect that. And I love that you brought that up, because I have always thought of poetry as a pulse of activism. Because, I mean, Maya Angelou, how can you not think of her as an activist through her poetry? Her words are quoted all the time, especially among people who are trying to push the needle toward humanity and love.
Yeah. Poetry's read at protests all the time.
Exactly. Oh, wow. I never thought of it as not part of it. So it's interesting that as a poet, that's been your experience. I mean, it's no different from music when it comes to activism, right? How all the songs of the 70s and the peace songs, right, that were written as activist peace songs. I don't know. I like your description of it as a pulse of activism.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Foundational. Maya, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It has been such a pleasure. Listeners, now it's your turn. I'm curious to know if you have been interested in poetry. Have you ever found it interesting or intriguing or inspiring? And if you haven't, why did you stop looking for poetry that might actually inspire you? I challenge you to find a poem in the next 2 days that really resonates. A poem that you can get into, dive into, maybe find some of your own healing in it. It could be from one of Maya Williams' books. It could be searching for poems about, and then put a keyword in there. Find your poem that can be your anthem for a little while. And when that gets tired, find another one to be an anthem for a little while, just as you would song lyrics or a song. And don't forget to purchase a book of poetry from some small local bookstore to support your local poet. Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You. How you tell them will.
Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.